Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Dora. If I ask people what they want, I believe a lot of you will say, I want money, right? Because with enough money, we can get almost everything that exists. The new cars, the latest handbags, phones, laptops. But did you know that most of what people call money is fat credit? For example, the total amount of credits in the US is about $50 trillion. But there's only $3 trillion of money. So what you spend on those things you want are mostly credits instead of money. See how useful credit is? Here comes our first question. What is credit? The word credit has a lot of meanings, but the one we're talking about today is a contractual agreement in which a borrower receives some money and commits to repaying the lender later. Like it is for the case of credit cards, which are used widely around the world, allowing people to get what they want immediately. In the case of credit cards, the lenders, or the banks, and the borrowers are the owners of the cards. So when you use your credit card to buy an item, you pay credit and promise to pay back the money later. People usually pay back once a month, and if you don't pay back on time, when you decide to pay back, you then need to pay the money you use plus the interest. And how many you pay is based on the interest rate. Some other forms of credit are car loans and mortgages, in which you can borrow a lot more before you pay back, and the due date is usually a lot longer. Lenders look at the borrower's credit scores. They need to make sure the borrower is creditworthy so that they'll get their money back. During the past decade, online platforms developed online credit scores. They look from a lot of perspectives, and it made them very accurate because they can get data from almost anywhere. From there, you can obviously see how creditworthy you are. These platforms also allow people to borrow online easily, but usually with a high interest rate. As we move into the digital world, I believe more of these online borrowing will be available, which can lead to an expansion in credit. So now, we should start to think, is credit good or bad? Credit can be good or bad. It depends on how and when you use it. Let's imagine a story about Jack and Abby. Jack is a very organized middle-class man who works for a company as the salesperson. He rents a one-bedroom apartment in Boston. This is the 5th year since he started working after graduating. He pays most of his attention on work. He doesn't buy new things constantly and has a plan of how many he's going to spend. He always pays back his credit card on time and never had to pay the interest. Jack sees his card as a very useful tool that allows him to spend more when he feels like to. This year, Jack is planning on buying his own apartment instead of renting. Because of the fact that he always pays back, he's very creditworthy. So he's allowed to pay only a small bit of the cost on the day and pay more as he earned more. Abby's situation, on the other hand, is not as good. Abby is always buying new dresses and handbags, etc. She keeps buying them even though she doesn't need nearly as many of them. If she has enough to afford them, it'll be fine. But she doesn't earn a lot for income, which means she's constantly not paying back on time. After a few years, the interest she needs to pay have risen, which makes her even less likely to be able to pay back. Because of the fact that she doesn't pay back, her credit scores are very low. So, when she wants to buy a new car, she is asked to pay all of the money on the day. And there's no way she's going to afford the car. Now you'll see, in Jack's case, credit is super helpful and gives him the opportunity to buy things he wants. But Abby's not as lucky. The interest she needs to pay have gotten so high that there is no way she's going to be able to pay back in a short time, which means it will not stop rising. So, whether credit is good or bad depends on how people make use of it. All that was on a macroeconomic level. Now let's look at the big picture. Is credit good or bad for a country's economy overall? Well, mostly it is good. Credit allows more spending and investments. This is good for an economy because what a person spends eventually becomes the income of another person. So when MB spends more on products produced by the company Jack works for, Jack gets more. And because he gets more, he can then spend more. You now may think credit is just perfect for the economy. But wait, you haven't listened to the dark side of it. Credit expands when people's expectations of the economy is high. But as humans, we become overconfident and our behaviors become irrational, which can make us spend too much credit. When there's too much credit, inflation happens. Prices of products gets higher and higher. Some people can no longer afford their basic needs. The government must then deal with the inflation by increasing interest rates. Think about what happens when interest rates are increased. People try their best to borrow less from the banks because they don't want to pay the interest or they don't have enough to pay the interest. Now, this can cause bad consequences, but luckily, after some time, there will be less credit, and inflation will no longer be a problem. After saying that credit is only helpful when we make the correct use of it, I think now it's time for you to learn about what are the correct ways. Here I have some tips on what you should not do and recommendations on what you should. And I hope this can make credit your greatest tool. Let's start with the tips. Firstly, the most important one. Don't spend credit if you don't think you can pay back. Because if you don't think you can pay back, it's likely that you can't. So, if you don't want to be paying those interest, estimate your ability to repay before you spend. Secondly, don't borrow to buy things you don't need or things that won't help you produce. Buying some fancy things are fine, but if you can't afford them, don't buy them. Thirdly, don't forget to pay your credit cards. Moving on to the recommendations. To help you remember paying your cards, you should try ways like setting up a reminder or auto-repay. You should also have a schedule of on what day you're paying back. Maybe it's the same day of each month. Everything has two sides, so does credit. If you don't use it properly, it can cause problems. But if you make good use of it, you'll know it's the greatest tool. Thank you.